That night, the 16th floor of Brooks Logic was still glowing with fluorescent light. In the boardroom, a sharp voice rang out for the third time. "This is unacceptable! 100 experts and not one can crack this equation?" Elliot Brooks, the company's CEO, was starting to lose patience. Outside in the hallway, Nina Alvarez, the night shift maintenance worker, was mopping the floors, quietly absorbing the tension leaking from behind the frosted glass. She wore just one earbud, the other ear reserved for real life. Suddenly, the boardroom door flew open. 3 engineers walked out looking defeated, clipboards in hand, dark circles under their eyes, and 2 unfinished pizza boxes barely held in one arm. Nina watched silently, then calmly wheeled her cart inside. She set the mop in a corner, tossed her cleaning cloth into the bucket with a dramatic flick, then looked up at the digital whiteboard, still showing the tangled equation. "What a beautiful mess," she murmured, grabbing a dry cloth and beginning to wipe. But just seconds later, her eyes paused on a number in the center of the formula. She stopped moving. "Wait a minute." Nina leaned in, squinting slightly. The jumble of numbers and symbols looked like a familiar recipe someone had accidentally messed up. She stepped back 3 paces, arms crossed against her cleaning cart. "They're making a big deal out of something this obvious," she muttered, her brow furrowed. Curiosity got the best of her. She walked up to the board, picked up a red marker, and began sketching below the equation. A tiny shift here, a substitution there, a diagonal line, a quick flip. In under a minute, a new mathematical path emerged, clean, precise, and completely logical. "All done," she said, winking at her mop, like she just pulled off a magic trick. Right then, as if cued by a movie editor, a voice echoed from behind. "Did you do this?" Nina jumped. She spun around. At the doorway stood Elliot Brooks, CEO of Brooks Logic, looking like he had just stepped off the cover of a business magazine. Crisp suit, perfectly styled hair, and a gaze sharp enough to slice through steel. "Was this you?" he asked, walking in slowly. Nina pointed to the mop in the corner. "Nope, that was Marco, the mop over there." Silence. "Kidding," she added. "It was me." He stepped closer to the board, eyes locked on the equation, then glanced at her, and back at the board again. "This is impossible. None of our consultants even considered this shortcut," he muttered, pulling a tablet from his jacket and typing like a man on a mission. Nina leaned against her cart, pretending not to care. Maybe they were too busy trying to look like geniuses. "Where did you learn this?" he asked without looking up. "College. 2 years. Had to drop out. Couldn't afford the rest. But I guess you wouldn't know about that. You're rich." For the first time in years, someone spoke to Elliot Brooks without fear, without flattery, and with a hint of sarcasm. He looked at her, longer than necessary. "You're funny," he murmured, almost to himself. The next morning, no one expected Nina Alvarez to show up in the main conference room at Brooks Logic. But she did, right on time, wearing her pressed maintenance uniform and a neatly tied bun. She pushed her cleaning cart up to the doorway and smiled. "Mind if I leave him out here? He gets grumpy when he misses meetings." A few engineers chuckled. Elliot sat at the head of the table and motioned for her to take the chair beside him. Nina sat down carefully, adjusted her collar, and folded her hands neatly on the table, like a student arriving at her final thesis defense. "Last night you did something unexpected," Elliot began. "We'd like to understand what you saw that none of our experts did." Nina blushed slightly but spoke calmly. "Honestly, I just thought maybe you were overcomplicating something that didn't need to be." She pointed to the screen where the equation still glowed. "It's kind of like cleaning a floor. You can use 3 different chemicals and still not get it clean, or sometimes a damp cloth will do the trick." A few soft laughs rippled around the room. She wasn't trying to be funny, just honest. "Did you study this field?" one young engineer asked. "I did, software engineering, 2 years. Had to stop when my mom got sick. I needed to work, take care of my little sister, and tuition, well, it was heavier than a full mop bucket." Silence. Not pity, respect. "So how do you remember all of it?" another asked. Nina smiled. "Because my mind never stopped learning. Just my bank account did." Liam Grant, The technical director cleared his throat and held up a printed page. "I reviewed her calculations last night," he said. "The solution is completely correct. In fact," he glanced at the team, "she found a more efficient path than our current protocol." The atmosphere shifted: surprise, admiration, discomfort. Elliot stayed silent, eyes steady on her. "So you think what you did last night was just luck?" Nina looked straight at him. "Do you think 30 years of scrubbing floors taught me how to solve equations? By luck?" A question soft as breath. But it left the room completely still. Nina's answer landed softly, but it shifted something in the air. No one spoke at first. A few glances passed quietly between the engineers. The same people who, just last night, dismissed her as just the janitor, were now looking at her with genuine attention. One of the skeptics in the corner, the kind who always raised eyebrows, gave a slight nod, as if even he couldn't argue with what she'd shown. "She's right," someone whispered. Then another asked, "Have you ever considered being a tech consultant?" Nina shrugged, half teasing, half sincere. "No one's ever asked." The mood changed. It was no longer an interrogation. It had become a conversation, a moment of respect. Admiration didn't come from flash or flare. It came from the way she stood among them, humble, sharp, and quietly undeniable. In the days that followed, Nina was no longer just the janitor. She was invited to sit in on internal meetings, at first to observe, but it didn't take long for people to notice the way she quietly scribbled in her small notebook, her eyes catching every detail. The second time a data engineer hit a dead end with a parsing algorithm, Nina spoke gently. "If the numbers keep getting stuck in one spot, maybe someone's forcing them in the wrong direction." It sounded like a casual remark, but Liam, the technical director, decided to tweak the process as she suggested. Within minutes, the system ran smoothly again. "Hit the mark again," he murmured. No one called it luck anymore. Elliot stayed mostly quiet, but he watched. And it was obvious, after a while, his eyes lingered on her more than they used to. There was something about Nina that unsettled him, not because she was brilliant, but because she made everything that used to feel heavy lighter. She softened tense meetings, she nodded silently at engineering jokes she didn't fully understand but still smiled, because she wanted to listen. One afternoon, Elliot stood by the glass wall watching Nina explain an algorithm to a junior engineer using a story about her mother's stew. You have to wait for the right moment to add the spices, too early or too late, and you ruin both the dish and the data. The team laughed. Elliot didn't. He just stood there, still. And for the first time, he smiled. Not because he was being polite, but because of her. That evening, the office was quieter than usual. Most employees had gone home. Elliot stepped into the elevator just as Nina was mopping nearby. "Evening," she said, voice soft as ever. Elliot gave a nod. "Working late?" "A few corners left to clean before the chaos returns in the morning," she smiled. He held the door. "Going up?" "Sure. Thanks." The doors closed. The elevator began to rise, then jolted, stopping between the 22nd and 23rd floor. Lights flickered. Control panel went dark. "Oh no," Nina muttered, pressing the emergency button. No response. Elliot tried his phone. No signal. "We're stuck," he said, trying to stay calm. Nina sighed, sat down on the floor, her mop bucket rolling beside her. "I'm becoming an expert at weird situations involving you. This happened to you often?" "No, but when it does, you're always part of it." She chuckled. Elliot didn't. "You don't like surprises, do you?" "I'm a CEO. Surprises mean errors. Errors mean losses." She nodded, her gaze softening. "So, you're always like this? Controlled, composed, never skipping a beat?" "I was raised that way." "By your father?" she asked gently. Elliot looked up at the ceiling. "Yes." He believed people were only worth as much as their performance. "And your mother?" "She passed when I was young." Nina was quiet for a while, then said, "My mom was the opposite. worked 12-hour shifts, and still managed to laugh with us every night. When she got sick, I dropped out of school. Not for some noble reason, just because it was the right thing to do. Elliot looked at her longer than he should have. Are you always this lighthearted? I try. If life doesn't give me reasons to smile, I make my own. Good thing I brought my mop bucket, Nina said, patting it beside her. Otherwise, I'd have nothing to lean on when panic hits. Elliot laughed, really laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a real, unguarded laugh that surprised even himself. Nina raised an eyebrow. Wow, a genuine smile. I should mark this historic moment. You've made me laugh more than my entire board of directors, he replied, voice softer than usual. In that small elevator space, lit only by emergency lights casting soft shadows, something shifted. A hint of closeness, a thread of understanding, something that didn't quite have a name yet. They didn't touch, they didn't say much more, but their eyes lingered longer than necessary. And for the first time, Elliot didn't want the moment to end too quickly. Monday morning, everything seemed normal until the first notification lit up on the internal message board. A tech blog had posted the headline, "Unqualified Janitor Involved in $1 Million AI Project at Brooks Logic." Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Tech blogs, gossip sites, even morning talk shows, all were suddenly talking about Nina Alvarez, but not as a surprising talent, as a joke. A photo of her smiling beside the whiteboard in her maintenance uniform circulated with sarcastic captions. Next up, bus drivers as data scientists? No degree needed, just a mop and some Wi-Fi. Nina saw it while cleaning the glass doors outside the project room. A nearby intern had his phone out, laughing. She caught a glimpse of the headline, her photo, her name, her dignity turned public. She didn't say a word, just set down the cloth and walked to the break room. 30 minutes later, when she came out, her eyes weren't red. But something in them had shifted. She walked into the break room where a group of engineers were chatting. The room fell silent. A few looked down. A few stared, curious, not cruel, but not kind either. Nina stood tall, voice unnervingly calm. You do know I'm standing right here, right? If you're going to talk about me, at least wait until I leave the room. No one answered. Meanwhile, upstairs in the executive floor, Elliot Brooks entered the crisis room. News headlines covered the main screen. He clenched his briefcase strap. Find out who leaked this, remove all unauthorized images. We're trying to contain it, the communications director began. Don't try, do it, he snapped. When Elliot finally found Nina, she was alone in the old boardroom, the place where it all started. The whiteboard was blank now. She was staring silently out the window. I saw it, she said before he could speak. You want to protect me, but I don't need protecting. I need respect. He said nothing. She stood, took off her badge, and set it on the table. I'm used to being underestimated out there, but inside these walls, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd be seen for what I bring, not what I wear. Nina left on Tuesday morning. No goodbyes, no note. Just her employee badge on the edge of the meeting table, right where she had once stunned a room full of engineers into silence. Next to it, her cleaning cloth, neatly folded, as if to say, I don't leave a mess, not even when I leave broken. At first, no one noticed. The company moved on. The 9 a.m. meetings still happened, the espresso machine still ran, though somehow the coffee tasted more bitter. By afternoon, the pothos plant in the corner began to wilt. No one remembered Nina had quietly watered it every morning. A few days later, the break room lost its hint of citrus. She used to leave orange peels in the air purifier. Meetings returned to being stiff and efficient. Everyone said the right things, like machines. But the spark that made the room human was gone. And the quiet laughter? Gone. There was no one left to toss in an odd metaphor that somehow made perfect sense. But the one who felt it most was Elliot Brooks. He walked into the boardroom Wednesday morning and glanced at the empty seat beside him. Normally, he wouldn't care, but that morning he sat down and for the first time missed the way someone would lean in and tilt her head like she was reading his thoughts. Something was off in the office, not broken, just soulless. Emails still came, projects moved forward, but it all felt hollow. She wasn't part of the structure, but without her, the structure had no heartbeat. By Friday afternoon, Elliot closed his laptop mid-meeting. No one dared question him. He left the room without explanation. Driving across the city, he didn't have an address, just remembered Nina once mentioned her sister worked near a bakery in a certain neighborhood. He found the building, old brick, chipped paint, windows cracked. Standing at the door, he realized this was the first time in his life he'd gone looking for someone, not for profit, not for control, but because he felt empty. Carmen, Nina's mother, opened the door. She wore a worn sweater, her eyes filled with quiet curiosity. "You're her boss?" "Elliot," he said softly. "I'd like to see her." She looked at him a long time, then disappeared inside. A minute later, Maya came out, flowers still on her sleeves. "She doesn't want to see anyone from the company, especially you." Elliot nodded. His eyes were tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say he missed her, didn't explain, didn't apologize, just stood there. Maya looked again. Something in him softened her edge. "If you're here because you feel guilty, don't. But if you're here because she matters, not to the project, but to you, then wait." Elliot said nothing. He looked up at the second-floor window, light still on. A shadow passed behind the curtain, then vanished. He didn't know if she saw him, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a CEO. He was just a man standing outside a door he should have never let her walk through alone. Elliot left the apartment building without a word, but as he got into his car, he knew this couldn't be where the story ended. That night, he stayed late at the office, alone in the empty boardroom where Nina once sat across from him, eyes sharp, quiet, and full of self-respect. He replayed the internal video of her first impromptu presentation. The way she pointed out a flaw in the data model with nothing more than a comparison to her mother's soup. He realized no one could convince the investors of SenseRoot like Nina, not just because she understood it, but because she felt it. The next day, he wrote her an email. No long paragraphs, no persuasion. Just one line. If you stood at the center this time, could the technology finally reach their hearts? 3 hours later, she replied, "I won't come back to be applauded. I'll come back to prove that even technology can have a soul." Nina's return wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't about Elliot. It was a choice rooted in strength and quiet dignity. She didn't come back to reclaim a title. She came to prove that those once dismissed could still walk into the center of a room and make the world listen. With intelligence, with experience, with heart. 1 week later, at Brooks Logic headquarters, the largest conference room was prepared for the biggest presentation of the year, the final pitch to secure funding for the SenseRoot AI project, worth tens of millions. Elliot sat at the head of the table, his notes untouched. All eyes were on the door. Everyone knew who was delivering the pitch, and it wasn't him. When the door opened, Nina walked in. Gone was the maintenance uniform. Today, she wore a crisp white blouse, her hair pinned up, her eyes as bright as ever, but now with the calm of someone who'd been dismissed and chose to rise anyway. No applause, none needed. The silence said enough. They were witnessing something worth hearing. She stood center stage, looking directly at the investors. "Good morning, I'm Nina Alvarez. I'm not an engineer. I don't have a degree. I didn't go to the Ivy League, but I do know how technology should speak the language of people." The first slide appeared, no graphs, just one sentence. "You will never understand AI if AI doesn't understand you." The room held its breath. She continued, voice steady. "We're building artificial intelligence to understand human emotions, but we present it in terms so abstract and cold, it loses the very purpose we created it for. I'm not here to sound smart. I'm here so even my mother could understand. and feel what this technology can do. She broke down SenseRoute using real examples. A rural teacher hoping to detect sadness in her students' faces. A nurse trying to catch early signs of depression. A lonely man hoping his AI companion won't just respond, but empathize. Doubt shifted into interest. Nods, then something deeper, understanding. When Nina closed with the final slide, AI isn't just about logic. It's our chance to help the world hear the voices it usually ignores. The room stood in applause. Elliot watched from the back, this time with nothing to hide. The lead investor approached him, shook his hand. "Is she your advisor or co-founder?" Elliot smiled, eyes still locked on Nina. "She's the reason we still believe technology exists, to serve humanity." The pitch ended with thunderous applause, but the real moment wasn't in the sound. It was in the investors' eyes as they signed. $50 million, 0 cents for SenseRoute. On one condition, Nina would become the face of its human-centered innovation. For the first time, the woman once labeled the janitor was now introduced as the chief advisor for applied human insight. Nina bowed slightly, saying nothing, but Elliot saw the light in her eyes, not for the money, not for the title, but because she finally belonged. And to him, that was the greatest victory he'd ever witnessed. That night, the rooftop of Brooks Logic's 28th floor shimmered under strings of warm golden lights. White lilies lined the buffet table, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. It wasn't labeled a romantic celebration, but everyone could feel something different in the air. The investors had signed, the project was secure, but what made the atmosphere unique was an unspoken truth. Tonight wasn't just a milestone for technology. It was a turning point for something far more human. Elliot stood near the edge of the terrace, a wine glass in hand, eyes quietly following Nina across the room. She was chatting with a group of junior engineers, her voice calm, her smile light. She seemed at ease, as if she'd never left. But Elliot remembered. He remembered the silence when she was gone. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no red lipstick, but he had never seen anyone look so luminous in a room full of polished people. As the crowd thinned, Elliot walked toward her. She turned, no surprise on her face, no hesitation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all evening. "You know," he began, "I used to think I had control over everything. Every step, every number, every decision. Then you walked in, not as a variable, but as something I couldn't calculate." Nina smiled. "Did you just call me an unsolvable equation?" He laughed for the first time all night. "No, I think you're the answer I never thought I deserved to find." They stood there, saying nothing more, just breathing. The lights behind them blurred the chatter, the clinking glasses, until only the space between them remained. "Elliot," she said softly, "I'm not great at analyzing emotions. I just know, when you look at me, I feel like I belong, like I don't have to fight so hard just to exist." He didn't reply. He took a step closer. And then, without fanfare, without warning, he leaned in, his lips meeting hers with a gentleness that said more than any words ever could. Their first kiss. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a climax. It was a moment two strong people finally letting themselves be soft. And in that moment, everything that had once been so complicated suddenly felt simple. The next morning, the office returned to its usual rhythm. Keyboards clicking, printers humming, the faint scent of weak coffee. But to Nina, everything felt different. Last night, when Elliot kissed her, she believed something had shifted, not just between them, but within him. She walked into the 16th floor with a quiet kind of hope. Not loud, just enough to make her chest feel light. Elliot stood talking with the engineering team. His eyes passed over her, quick, cool, like she was just another employee, but his fingers fidgeted with the pen cap, like they always did when he was trying to act unbothered. No nod, no pause, just a distance, invisible but real. All day, he avoided her. In meetings they both attended, Elliot spoke only of work, brief, precise, without a single glance that lingered. Nina understood, and that made it hurt more. She wasn't angry, but she was sad, because the man who let her in last night, this morning, had locked the door and thrown away the key. She returned to her charts and reports, but something was different. Her voice softer, her smile slower, as if every word cost just a little more than it did yesterday. 3 days after the party, Nina submitted her resignation. No explanations, no blame, just a subject line that read, "I wasn't made to be someone else's emotional detour." Elliot read the email at 6 a.m., the glow of his laptop casting long shadows in the room. He sat motionless for a long time. No reply, no steps taken, just an ache in his chest no contract clause could cover. When Nina arrived to hand in the official papers, she wore a white blouse, her hair tied back, steps steady, like she had already made peace with her decision. Elliot saw her from the glass wall upstairs. He could have gone down, could have called her name, but he didn't. Because he was afraid that if he spoke, his emotions would unravel into something neither of them could control, and because he was too used to sacrificing a little personal truth for the sake of professional perfection. Nina placed the file on HR's desk and walked away. No glance back, no hesitation. But she knew, and he knew, what she left behind wasn't just a job. It was unfinished thoughts, unspoken feelings, a kiss that never got the chance to become more. Elliot stayed in his office until midnight, alone. No one saw him cry, but the plans he drafted that night felt emptier than ever. 1 week after Nina left, for the second time, the company remained functional. The lights stayed on, meetings were held, employees showed up, emails sent, milestones checked. But Elliot saw it. Something had gone missing. Something no metric could capture, no budget could repair, and no investor could replace. The air had shifted. It was heavier now, as if the glass walls of Brooks Logic were echoing an absence no one dared to name. The boardroom was back to being precise, statements clean, data airtight, but no one asked, what if we did this differently? No more chuckles when someone compared machine learning to soup seasoning. The engineers whispered, heads close, but no one spoke out loud. The sense of being heard, the one Nina created without ever saying it, was gone. And no one could fake it. Elliot felt it more deeply than anyone. He walked into rooms that felt colder. He signed approvals, gave direction, but his words rang hollow, like they bounced off walls, no longer listening. Thursday night, Elliot stayed late. He sat in his office under the dim desk lamp, staring at his screen. 7 drafts had come and gone. He wrote one more. Didn't edit this time, just hit send. Email. I should have been braver. I was wrong to choose silence over truth. If you're still reading this, I'm sorry. Deeply. He didn't expect a reply, but 10 minutes later his phone lit up. Just 2 words, not going. No anger, no explanation, just clarity. You're unmistakable, Nina. Elliot didn't move for a while. The feeling in his chest wasn't regret anymore. It was loss. Not, this can still be fixed, but this is already gone. The next morning, he took the stage at the National Tech Conference. Press, investors, entrepreneurs watching, no slides, just one choice: to finally say everything truthfully and publicly. The university courtyard buzzed with cheers as graduation caps filled the sky. Maya, Nina's younger sister, had just earned her degree in special education, beaming in her deep blue gown. Nina sat in the front row, smiling proudly, but a hint of emptiness lingered behind her eyes. She had hoped Elliot might come, then quietly reminded herself, he's not the kind of man who does foolish things in public. What she didn't know, Elliot had been there all along, hidden in the crowd, bouquet in one hand and in the other a folded mop handle, shaking slightly. When Maya's name was called, the courtyard erupted in applause, but no one expected who walked up next. Elliot Brooks. He stepped onto the stage, no microphone, no announcement, just eyes locked on Nina. who had stood up in shock. "I'm not great with speeches," he said, voice trembling but clear. "About there's one thing I know." He pulled the mop from his coat and raised it gently. "You didn't just teach me about AI or emotions. You taught me that sometimes the one who cleans the floor understands the human heart better than anyone else." Then he stepped down, walked to her, knelt, eyes soft, voice steady. "You cleaned the floors and my heart. Will you marry me?" The crowd roared. Maya screamed so loud her cap flew off. Nina covered her face, laughing through tears. "Yes," she said, "with two conditions. You learn how to mop, and you start talking nicely to the pothos plant in the office." Elliot let out a laugh. Not loud, but the kind that comes from deep relief, the kind that breaks through months of quiet guilt. "That's it?" he asked, eyes glistening. "Just mop floors and talk to the plant?" Nina nodded, her voice shaky through a half laugh, half tear. "The pothos deserves respect, and floors don't clean themselves." Without another second of hesitation, Elliot reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver box. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. A simple ring, unflashy, unassuming, but one he'd chosen a week ago, carrying it with him, waiting for the right moment. He slipped it gently onto her finger. That hand, the one he thought he might never hold again. Nina looked down at the ring, then up at him, eyes wide, like she still wasn't sure this was real. "I thought," she whispered, voice cracking, "you weren't coming back." Elliot pulled her into his arms, not caring about the cheers erupting across the courtyard. He held her tightly, as if making up for every inch of distance he'd once created. "I got lost," he murmured into her hair. "But you were the only map that ever led me home." She buried her face into his chest, tears finally falling. Not from weakness, but because, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged again. And on a graduation day surrounded by strangers and second chances, two people who'd once lost each other finally found their way back. They didn't get married in a grand ballroom. Instead, they chose the backyard of Nina's childhood home. Wooden fences weathered with time, paper lanterns strung from the porch, and the warm scent of fresh pastries drifting from Carmen's kitchen. Elliot, once used to million-dollar galas, now wore a plain white shirt, carefully setting up folding chairs with Maya, treating each task like the most important negotiation of his life. Carmen leaned in and whispered, "That boy knows how to wash dishes now." Nina just smiled. No big dress, no procession, just her hair down, a tiny floral crown, and a gaze meant for one man only. That evening, under string lights and soft acoustic guitar, they exchanged vows, not long, but heartfelt enough to draw tears from every guest. After the ceremony, they sat under the pothos plant, transplanted from the office, now rooted in their backyard. Nina turned to him and said, "I want to start a coding center. Not for engineers, for the kids who got left behind. I want to call it Code from the Heart." Elliot took her hand. "We'll start it right here, in this backyard." 3 years later, that little backyard had grown into a vibrant learning center, Code from the Heart, where once dismissed children now proudly typed their first lines of code. Nina still taught, just like day one. Whiteboard, markers, and that gentle gaze focused on every child. No fancy tech, just a patient, beating heart. Elliot sat at the back, laptop open, managing curriculum progress. He was no longer the CEO of a tech empire. He was the man laying bricks for a different kind of future. Slow, steady, meaningful. In mid-lesson, as sunlight streamed through the windows, Nina looked up and caught his eye. He smiled. So did she. They didn't need to say a word. Because in that quiet, under the same sunlight that once lit a glass boardroom, they finally learned happiness doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real.